It seems like everyone is talking about bees. It might be because there are 2.8 million honeybee hives in the US alone.
The wild idea of unleashing millions of bees into a barren desert seemed like a guaranteed disaster. People laughed, mocked, and wrote it off as Nevada's latest crazy stunt. But just 1 month later, everyone was eating their words. And here's why. Let's dive into the unexpected buzz Nevada created and why that desert isn't so lifeless anymore. Why dump millions of bees in the desert? At first glance, dumping millions of bees into a dry, dusty desert sounds like a recipe for disaster, maybe even a prank. So why did Nevada go for it? The truth is, it wasn't a random or reckless move. It came from a growing crisis. Bees worldwide have been struggling with population declines, and Nevada's desert ecosystems weren't doing much better. Without enough pollinators buzzing around, native plants couldn't reproduce, and entire ecosystems started to unravel. Nevada's scientists and environmentalists saw an opportunity. Could releasing a massive number of bees into the desert kickstart nature's comeback? Sure, the idea sounded wild. Millions of tiny insects in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Critics were quick to mock, calling it foolhardy and pointless. But sometimes, big risks lead to surprising rewards. Let's explore how this seemingly crazy plan came to be and why it was actually a thoughtful attempt to fix something much bigger than just the desert itself. More than just honeymakers. When most people think of bees, the first thing that comes to mind is probably honey, sweet, golden, and delicious. But bees are so much more than just honey factories. They're one of the most critical players in the natural world, especially when it comes to pollination.
Honeybees, for example, the poster child for pollinators, not only feed on pollen while they're on a flower, but they also actively collect and accumulate pollen grains,
which is like the secret handshake plants use to reproduce. Without bees buzzing from flower to flower, many plants wouldn't be able to make seeds or fruit, which means ecosystems would struggle to survive and thrive. Pollination is kind of like matchmaking in nature. Bees collect nectar and pollen to feed themselves and their colonies, but in doing so, they carry pollen grains from one flower to another. This transfer allows plants to fertilize their eggs and create the next generation. Without this vital process, a lot of the fruits, vegetables, nuts, and flowers we love wouldn't exist. Believe it or not, nearly 75% of the world's flowering plants depend on pollinators like bees. Now, here's the kicker. Bees aren't just suited for lush gardens or temperate climates. Certain species of bees are incredibly resilient and have adapted to survive in challenging environments, including deserts. These desert bees have evolved behaviors and physical traits to deal with extreme heat, scarce water, and limited food sources. They can fly during cooler parts of the day and forage efficiently, finding hidden blooms and water droplets you'd never notice. This adaptability is why Nevada's plan to release millions of bees into its desert might actually work. It's not about throwing helpless insects into a wasteland. It's about introducing nature's own survivors into a struggling ecosystem that desperately needs a jumpstart. The bee's role isn't just about producing honey. It's about restoring life. And there's more to it than just wild plants. Bees are crucial for agriculture too. Many of the crops that feed us, apples, almonds, berries, and even onions, need bees to pollinate. Without these tiny workers, crop yields drop, prices rise, and food security becomes shaky. Pollinators contribute billions of dollars to the global economy each year, making their survival essential for both nature and humans. When Nevada dumped millions of bees into the desert, it wasn't a reckless stunt. It was a calculated experiment rooted in understanding the power and resilience of these tiny, buzzing superheroes. Could bees turn an inhospitable desert into a blossoming landscape? And what does it mean for the state's environment and people? The desert landscape before the bees. Picture Nevada's desert before the bees showed up. Vast, dry, and seemingly lifeless. You might imagine endless sand dunes, scorching sun, and a whole lot of nothing. While deserts are often painted as barren wastelands, they actually host a surprising variety of life adapted to the tough conditions. But the reality is, Nevada's desert ecosystem was struggling. It was a fragile balance that had started tipping toward decline. The biggest challenge? Water. Rainfall in the Nevada desert is scarce, sometimes less than 10 inches a year, and temperatures can swing wildly, blistering hot by day and freezing cold at night. This makes it hard for most plants to grow and for animals to find enough food and shelter. Native desert plants, like creosote bushes, sagebrush, and wildflowers, do their best to survive, but without enough pollinators, their reproduction rates drop. Pollinators like bees play a crucial role here, but their numbers were shrinking, not just in Nevada, but across the globe.
Tonight, the beekeeping industry is in crisis over the shocking and unexplained deaths of hundreds of millions of bees over the last 8 months. Now, this could impact all of the U.S.
Pesticide use, habitat loss, climate change, and diseases have been hammering bee populations for decades. In a place like Nevada's desert, where every plant matters, fewer pollinators meant fewer seeds, fewer flowers, and ultimately less food and shelter for desert animals. Local wildlife, lizards, birds, small mammals, rely on this delicate plant life to survive. If plants can't reproduce, the whole food chain starts to collapse. It's like removing bricks from a building. Eventually, the whole thing gets unstable. So before the bees arrived, the Nevada desert was caught in a cycle of decline. The harsh environment wasn't making it easy, but the loss of pollinators was speeding up the desert's slow fade. Scientists worried that if nothing changed, the ecosystem could lose vital biodiversity, leading to long-term damage that might take decades or even centuries to reverse. Given this precarious situation, it's no wonder many people doubted that dumping millions of bees into such an unforgiving landscape could help. The desert looked too barren, the climate too harsh, and the challenges too big. But what if those millions of bees could help flip the script? What if they could spark new life where it seemed impossible? That's exactly the question Nevada's scientists wanted to answer and why this bold experiment got underway. How do you even begin to introduce millions of bees into a desert? The arrival. It's not like dropping a box of bees and walking away. Nevada's bee release was a carefully planned operation, combining logistics, biology, and a bit of faith in nature's resilience. First off, these weren't just any bees. The species chosen were hardy, adapted to tough climates, and efficient pollinators. Experts brought in colonies that could handle extreme temperatures and find scarce food and water sources. The plan wasn't to overwhelm the desert, but to seed it with enough bees to create a sustainable population. Transporting millions of bees was a massive task. They were kept in specialized hives on trucks, transported during cooler parts of the day to avoid stressing the bees. Once at the desert sites, beekeepers carefully released the colonies near areas with native wildflowers and shrubs, giving the bees a fighting chance to find pollen and nectar. The initial reaction from locals and the media was a mix of amusement and disbelief. Dumping millions of bees into a desert? That's just asking for trouble, some said. Others worried about stings, allergies, or the bees wandering into towns. But the scientists had done their homework, choosing remote sites far from populated areas and monitoring the bees closely. Within days, the bees got to work. They started foraging around sparse desert blooms, uncovering little pockets of life even in the dry terrain. It was slow at first. The desert isn't exactly bursting with flowers in summer, but the bees were resilient. They adapted their foraging schedules, flying in early mornings and late afternoons when temperatures were more manageable. Interestingly, the bees also helped spread pollen between plants that hadn't been fertilized for years, sparking early signs of plant reproduction. It was the first glimmer of hope that this risky experiment might just work. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The desert's extreme conditions tested the bees daily. They had to find water sources in an environment where even a drop of moisture can be scarce. Some colonies didn't survive, but enough thrived to start changing the landscape. This arrival phase was crucial. It proved that bees could survive in the desert, at least temporarily, and that their presence was starting to affect the ecosystem. The skeptics might have mocked the idea, but the desert was quietly buzzing with new life, and the real story was just beginning. The possibility of deserts to bloom in full. Nevada is not really the first place you'd imagine when you hear the word bloom. But every now and then, something kind of surprising happens. The desert blooms. Not always, and not for long, but it does. So this whole thing is about whether Nevada's deserts can really bloom in full. Not just a few wildflowers here and there, but really bloom fully. Like flowers everywhere. That kind of thing. To start off, it's important to talk about what a desert bloom actually is. It's not really magic, even if it looks that way. Basically, desert blooms happen when there's just the right amount of rain at just the right time, usually in the winter or early spring. The seeds for many desert wildflowers are already there, buried in the sand or soil, just waiting. They can lie dormant for years, sometimes decades. So they're just kind of sitting there, doing nothing, until one day it rains a lot more than usual, and then, boom, flowers. Nevada, being part of the Great Basin Desert and also touching the Mojave Desert, has this potential. It has wildflower seeds just like California does. But the thing is, Nevada doesn't get as much media attention as, say, Death Valley when it comes to blooms. You've probably seen the pictures of super blooms in California. Endless orange, purple, yellow. Instagram goes wild. But Nevada? Not so much. Still, that doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means it hasn't happened as dramatically. Yet, as mentioned, the key factor here is rainfall. And not just any rain, it needs to be spaced out well. If it all falls at once, a lot of it runs off or evaporates before it can really soak in. Plus, the timing has to be right. If there's a warm spell too early, the seeds might start sprouting only to get hit with frost a week later. That kind of kills the whole process. And of course, wind plays a role. So does soil condition. It's actually a lot more complicated than just, did it rain or not? Now, scientists and botanists do keep track of this stuff. There are actual bloom forecasts in desert regions, sort of like weather forecasts, but for flowers. These help people know when to go out hiking or take pictures. In Nevada, especially in places like the Mojave areas near the California border, there's some interest in this. Areas around Red Rock Canyon, Valley of Fire, and even parts of Great Basin National Park can see blooms when the conditions are right. But again, it's not every year. In fact, it's kind of rare. Another thing that's important to mention is that climate change might actually make these blooms more unpredictable. Some years might be too hot. Some years might be too dry. And then every once in a while, there could be a year that's just perfect. So, when we talk about the possibility of the Nevada deserts blooming in full, we're really talking about a lot of ifs. If the rain is good, if the temperature stays right, if the winds don't blow the seeds away, if everything aligns. Still, it's not totally out of reach. There are records of good blooms in Nevada. Not quite super bloom level maybe, but still impressive. People who've lived in these regions for decades have seen them. They talk about whole hillsides turning yellow or purple, even just for a week or two. It's a short-lived thing usually. That's the nature of deserts. They go back to dry and dusty pretty fast. Some conservation groups and scientists have wondered if we could help this process along. Maybe with soil restoration or better land management, the desert could bloom more often. But then there's the issue of invasive species. Cheatgrass, for example, is a big problem in Nevada. It grows fast, sucks up water, and makes it harder for native wildflowers to thrive. It also contributes to more wildfires, which obviously isn't great. So it's not just about letting nature do its thing. There's a lot of human impact already baked in. Still, even with all that, the possibility is there. Nature's kind of persistent that way. It's not like the flowers disappeared. They're just waiting. And then, millions of bees in the picture came, and this is the result. Unexpected changes and surprises. At the start, most people thought the bees would struggle, or worse, fail completely in the harsh desert environment. After all, the Nevada desert is no place for a typical garden party, let alone millions of tiny pollinators trying to make a home. But something surprising happened within just the first month. The bees didn't just survive. They began transforming the desert in ways nobody expected. Right away, researchers noticed a subtle but promising shift. The bees started pollinating native plants that had been lying dormant or barely reproducing for years. Wildflowers, which usually only bloom sporadically after rare rainfalls, began showing signs of more consistent growth. Pollinated plants produce seeds, and those seeds meant that more plants would grow next season, potentially starting a positive cycle of regeneration.
Some pollinators, like honeybees, don't see exactly like we do. Bees see blue colours best, so when you see a blue or a purple flower, you can be pretty sure that the plant makes that flower especially to attract bee pollinators.
Locals who had walked through these parts for years began noticing changes too. There were more flowers dotting the landscape, small but vibrant patches of color popping up in the dusty sand. Birdwatchers spotted an uptick in species that rely on insects and plants for food. Even small mammals seemed to be benefiting from the greener environment. The bees themselves were thriving more than anyone predicted. They adapted to the extreme temperature swings by shifting their foraging times, buzzing out in early mornings and late afternoons to avoid the midday heat. Their ability to find hidden water sources like dew on plants or small desert springs, helped them survive the brutal dryness. But the biggest surprise was how fast these changes happened. Ecological shifts usually take years or even decades to become noticeable. Yet here, just a month after introducing millions of bees, the desert showed visible signs of life awakening. Scientists scrambled to document everything. Cameras captured blooming flowers and increased animal activity. Soil samples indicated that the plants were improving the ground quality, helping retain more moisture and nutrients. The bees were not just surviving, they were kickstarting a chain reaction that could transform the desert's ecosystem. Of course, not everything was perfect. Some bee colonies didn't make it, and certain areas remained stubbornly barren. But the early results were enough to shift the narrative. What was once considered a wild, laughable experiment suddenly looked like a promising solution to restore a struggling ecosystem. By the end of that first month, the desert buzz wasn't just about the bees, it was about hope. Hope that with a little help from nature, even the harshest environments could heal and thrive. The ripple effect. So, What happens when millions of bees start buzzing around a desert that was once almost lifeless? It turns out, quite a lot. The arrival of these tiny pollinators didn't just help a handful of flowers bloom. It sparked a chain reaction that began reshaping the entire ecosystem. First, the plants. With more bees pollinating native flowers and shrubs, seed production increased. Those seeds mean more plants grow, which leads to better ground cover. This helps reduce soil erosion, a huge issue in deserts where wind and water can strip away the fragile topsoil. More plants also mean more shade and moisture retention, which cools the soil and creates a better environment for other species to take hold. And it's not just plants that benefit. With an increase in vegetation, animals have more food and shelter. Birds that feed on insects and seeds started showing up more frequently, and small mammals like rodents found safer places to live and forage. Even reptiles, like lizards and snakes, indirectly benefited as their food sources increased. The bees essentially kicked off a positive feedback loop. More plants meant more nectar and pollen, which supported larger and healthier bee colonies. Larger bee populations, in turn, pollinated even more plants, accelerating the desert's recovery. It was like nature's own domino effect, one small change leading to bigger and better outcomes. Interestingly, the impact stretched beyond the immediate area of the bee release. Wind and animals carried seeds further into the desert, gradually greening spots that hadn't seen life in years. This kind of spread is crucial for long-term ecosystem recovery, helping prevent desertification from advancing. Scientists also noticed improvements in soil health. Plant roots helped stabilize the soil, while decaying plants added nutrients back to the ground. This improved soil quality supports even more diverse plant life, which is essential for a resilient desert ecosystem. Of course, this kind of ecological turnaround isn't magic. It takes time and patience, but the initial signs were clear. Nevada's bold bee experiment was starting to breathe life into a landscape many had written off. The desert was becoming more than just a dry wasteland. It was becoming a thriving habitat again. This ripple effect proved that with the right interventions, even the toughest ecosystems can heal. And it raised exciting questions. Could similar strategies help other deserts or degraded lands around the world? Nevada's desert buzz was turning into a model for environmental restoration, showing how a small insect can make a big difference. Agriculture and farmers in Nevada. When you think of Nevada, sprawling farms might not be the first image that comes to mind, but agriculture is a quietly important part of the state's economy and culture. From alfalfa fields to orchards growing apples, pears, and cherries, Nevada farmers rely heavily on pollinators to keep their crops healthy and productive. And that's where these millions of newly introduced bees come into the picture. Pollination isn't just a nice-to-have for farmers, it's essential. Many crops depend on bees to transfer pollen between flowers, which allows fruits and vegetables to form properly. Without bees, yields shrink, and the quality of produce drops. For farmers in Nevada's tough climate, where growing conditions are already challenging, losing pollinators would be a huge blow. In recent years, farmers across the country, including those in Nevada, have faced a growing pollination crisis. Bee populations have been declining due to factors like pesticide use, habitat loss, diseases, and climate change. This has forced some farmers to rent commercial bee colonies for pollination services at high costs, cutting into their profits and raising concerns about the sustainability of food production. By boosting the desert's native bee population, Nevada's experiment didn't just help wild plants, it gave farmers a much-needed hand. The influx of bees increased pollination rates in agricultural areas near the desert, leading to better crop yields and healthier plants. In some cases, farmers reported seeing more vibrant blossoms and bigger harvests just weeks after the bees arrived. This boost also had economic ripple effects. Stronger harvests mean more income for farmers and local communities, supporting jobs and small businesses linked to agriculture. Plus, healthier crops help keep food prices stable and contribute to food security, especially in a region where growing conditions can be unpredictable. Beyond economics, the bee experiment sparked renewed interest in sustainable farming practices. Many farmers began exploring ways to protect and encourage native pollinators, like planting bee-friendly flowers along field edges or reducing pesticide use, recognizing that healthy bee populations benefit everyone. Nevada's bee release showed that pollinators are the unsung heroes of agriculture. Their buzzing isn't just background noise. It's the sound of a system working, crops thriving, and farmers able to keep doing what they love. In a place where water is scarce and the environment is tough, having millions of new bee allies made all the difference. Economic impact beyond agriculture. When most people hear about millions of bees buzzing in Nevada's desert, their first thought usually jumps to farms and crops. And sure, the impact on agriculture is huge. But the story doesn't stop at the farm gate. The desert's newfound buzz brought surprising economic benefits that ripple through local communities in ways few expected. For starters, the desert itself started to feel less like a barren wasteland and more like a place worth visiting. Suddenly, those vibrant wildflower blooms became a draw for ecotourists, hikers, photographers, and nature lovers eager to witness a rare transformation.
We get calls every day, people asking if we have our flowers bloomed yet, where they are, if we've seen them, and what kinds and things. But that happens usually every year, but this year's going to be really good.
This influx of visitors helped local businesses, from small cafes to outdoor gear shops, see more customers during seasons that were typically slow. Local tour operators began offering guided nature walks focused on the bees and the blooming desert plants. These tours weren't just about pretty flowers. They were educational experiences explaining how pollinators revive ecosystems and why Nevada's desert was now a living laboratory of restoration. Schools got involved too, with field trips and citizen science projects that brought kids and families closer to nature and created new demand for educational materials and local guides. The growing interest also sparked job creation beyond traditional farming. Positions popped up for bee specialists, environmental educators, and conservation workers tasked with monitoring and supporting the desert's recovery. These roles helped diversify the local economy and provided new career paths in regions that often struggled with employment opportunities. Another surprising outcome: the rise in small-scale, sustainable businesses tied to the desert's revival. Artisans began creating bee-related crafts. Local honey producers marketed desert blossom varieties, and restaurants highlighted dishes inspired by native plants flourishing thanks to the bees. These ventures helped strengthen community identity and pride, turning the bees' presence into a cultural as well as economic asset. Of course, this economic buzz wasn't automatic or guaranteed. It required coordinated efforts between scientists, local leaders, and businesses to harness the desert's transformation responsibly. Too much tourist traffic, for example, could disrupt fragile habitats, so careful management was key. What this all shows is that environmental restoration can have wide-reaching benefits beyond the obvious. Bringing bees to Nevada's desert wasn't just about plants and pollination. It sparked a chain reaction that lifted communities, created new opportunities, and inspired hope that even harsh environments can support thriving economies. In a way, the bees became tiny ambassadors for Nevada's desert, carrying more than just pollen. They carried the promise of renewal and prosperity for people and nature alike. from mockery to admiration. When Nevada first announced their plan to dump millions of bees into a desert, the reaction was, let's just say, skeptical. Headlines ranged from amused disbelief to outright mockery. What could possibly go right with that? People asked. Bees in the desert? They'll be dead in days. Social media was flooded with jokes, memes, and plenty of eye-rolling. Even among scientists, opinions were mixed. Some experts thought it was a bold and innovative approach to ecological restoration, while others warned it was risky and could have unintended consequences. Critics feared that introducing so many bees into a fragile ecosystem might disrupt existing species or fail miserably in the harsh conditions. But as the weeks passed and the bees started working their magic, the tone shifted dramatically. Reports of blooming wildflowers, healthier plants, and thriving bee colonies began to pour in. The data didn't lie. Nevada's desert was coming back to life, and it was largely thanks to those tiny pollinators. Scientists who were initially doubtful started paying close attention. They began studying the bee populations, plant growth, and wider ecological impacts. What they found was encouraging. The bees were not only surviving, but their presence was helping restore balance to a degraded ecosystem. This sparked a wave of excitement in the environmental community, with researchers calling the experiment a game changer for restoration efforts. Public opinion followed suit. Local communities, who had once been wary of the idea, started embracing the bees. Some even joined citizen science projects to monitor the bees and document changes in the desert. Schools used the experiment as a teaching moment about ecology and the importance of pollinators. The story of Nevada's desert revival captured hearts and headlines nationwide. Still, some voices remained cautious, reminding everyone that ecological restoration is complex and ongoing. They emphasized the need for continued monitoring to ensure the bees don't cause unforeseen problems, like outcompeting native species or spreading diseases. But overall, the narrative had flipped. What began as a joke was now a hopeful example of how nature and science can work together. Nevada's bee experiment showed that sometimes big ideas start with a little buzz, and that even wild, seemingly crazy plans can lead to real, lasting change. The bigger picture. Nevada's bold move to unleash millions of bees into a desert might sound like a one-off stunt, but it's actually packed with lessons that stretch far beyond state lines. At its core, this experiment challenges how we think about environmental restoration and the role humans can play in healing damaged ecosystems. One big takeaway is that sometimes nature just needs a little nudge. The desert wasn't dying because it was hopeless. It was struggling because a crucial part of the puzzle, pollinators, had disappeared.
So if that plant goes away, the bee goes with it. So we have to make sure that if they only have certain plants that they pollinate, we maintain those plants.
By reintroducing bees, Nevada's scientists gave the ecosystem the missing link it needed to bounce back. This shows that smart interventions, based on understanding natural processes, can make a huge difference. Another lesson is the power of resilience and adaptation. The bees didn't just survive in the desert, they thrived by adjusting their behavior to harsh conditions. This adaptability is a hopeful reminder that many species can respond to changing environments if we create the right conditions. The experiment also highlights the importance of working with local ecosystems, not against them. Instead of importing exotic species or forcing unnatural changes, Nevada chose native or well-adapted bee species, giving the desert a fighting chance without disrupting the existing balance. This careful approach is a blueprint for restoration projects worldwide. Importantly, Nevada's story challenges the idea that deserts are lifeless or beyond saving. Deserts hold unique biodiversity and ecological value. They're not just empty spaces. When given a chance, these landscapes can regenerate, providing habitat, supporting wildlife, and even contributing to agriculture and local economies. Beyond ecology, the experiment sparks hope about tackling global environmental challenges. Climate change, habitat loss, and species declines feel overwhelming. But Nevada's success reminds us that targeted, science-backed efforts can have real impacts. Small creatures like bees can catalyze big change. Finally, this story underscores the need for ongoing monitoring and community involvement. Restoration isn't a quick fix. It's a long-term commitment that requires patience and collaboration between scientists, locals, and policymakers. Nevada's bee experiment is a testament to the power of curiosity, courage, and the willingness to try something unconventional. It's a buzzing reminder that when we respect nature's wisdom and lend a helping hand, healing is possible even in the toughest places. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe for more of our uploads.